But I tried to look as much like an 80s villain. I did ride the Peloton a little bit ago, so I'm trying to look as much like an 80s villain as possible. Welcome back, everybody, to Scattered Cast, a channel where we dedicate to what me and my brother are into in the moment. I'm Travis. This is my brother, Ray.
What's up?
And his shirt doesn't give it away too much, I don't know. But today, we're into Rad. And I don't know why I always want to say Rad Racing, and it's because of in the movie, the shirt. I always want to call this Rad Racing, but it's
So
just
and that's a lot of times when people look the movie up, they say Rad Racing.
Rad Racing. So, movie from the 80s. On the episode, we're going to break down, just to give you an overview, we're going to talk a little bit about the actors and directors of in the movie. Ray's going to do a synopsis of it. Then we're going to both talk about why we enjoyed it, why there's nostalgia for us. A little bit also why this movie was dead for a while. This is a very unique case of why it sort of was shelved and why it's so important that we actually have a physical copy of it. And then we'll wrap that up with some movies that are in this genre that we like, some recommendations, and some ones I just discovered while doing some research about Rad. So
yeah.
You ready?
Yep.
All right.
Let's break the ice.
Break the ice. So
if you've seen the movie,
yeah,
you'll get that reference.
So watch it and come back. All right. So to break down some of the characters in it, Bill Allen played Crew Jones, the main character. Mm-hmm. Lori Loughlin plays Christine. Now I thought that
and Becky.
Yeah. So I thought Lori Loughlin.
Pre-college scandal and Becky.
Oh man! So
30 seconds in, and I'm already busting it up.
Well, this was my joke. Was I thought Lori Loughlin had a thing for bad boys with Crew and Uncle Jesse, but it turns out she was the bad one.
She was the bad one. Yes, that's awesome though.
And then Talia Shire is Crew's mom. Totally forgot Rocky fame. Plays a big important part in the creation of this movie, I believe.
Yes, it does.
Producing, like, this is kind of her production. And then Bart Taylor was played by Bart Connor. An Olympic
gold medalist. Yes.
And he often gets confused for Johnny.
He does.
Zach,
yep.
I don't remember his name, but Johnny from Karate Kid. Very similar, blonde, bad boy, with his twin thugs, which I forgot to get them. But two alumni from 80 movies classics that I want to talk about. Ray Walton, Mr. Hand from Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Yeah.
And then Jack Weston from Dirty Dancing, the guy who runs the vacation place, are also. So there's a lot of people.
Isn't he also in Short Circuit? Are you talking about Duke West, the bad guy? I think he's in Short Circuit, maybe.
No, Jack Weston, he's an older white dude. He's got a
Oh, no, I know what you're talking about. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of the guy that is like the head of the Mongoose team, Duke Best.
Yeah.
He's in Short Circuit.
Oh, is he? My brain's not going.
He's the one that like for some reason, and a couple times in the movie, he has like this weird deliberate nasally thing going on.
Okay.
He's like, it's your job to find out. And he goes like that. And I'm like, what? Why is he talking like that?
A weird character choice. I'm going to bring this nasal weird thing to the table. All right. But directed by Hal Needman, who is an actor and stuntman that directed Smokey and the Bandit and Cannonball Run.
Yes.
And is the inspiration for Brad Pitt's character in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That was like,
that was the one that was like,
and you're like, how did this movie get shelved for so long? But I was reading a Vulture article, and they said that Bill Allen, the Hal Needham, and the whatever cast was available, I forget who else, went to a screening in 2011 that had fans. It was one of those please come out and do this type things. And then that was when, at least for Bill Allen, he saw holy shit, this is resonated with people. And Nora, the #1 Rider Awards for BMX, invited him to be a presenter. And he's kind of he's been an adopted member into the BMX community.
Right.
Which is really cool. And I was trying to think of who else that had kind of happened to. And I couldn't really find any other examples of someone who's like an actor or something, but it was like so integral in spotlighting something that they've sort of like a community has just accepted him as like he's one of us.
Yes.
But also, we'll get to this later. So that's the synopsis of those are like the behind the scenes, you know, the nuts and bolts. I didn't get to watch. I want to watch it with my wife because this is one of those. We'll talk about later those movies. That's like an '80s classic to me and my brother, and nobody else knows about pretty much. I mean,
yeah, and I think that's
our crew, no pun intended. But so jump into like basically synopsis if you're going to describe this movie to somebody with a little bit more, you know,
right.
So you're trying to sell them on what this movie's about.
Right.
Not to put you
so this movie is basically like, if you like Karate Kid, this is basically like almost a reverse Karate Kid with BMX bikes. So it's your typical 80s formula movie where, you know, you've got kind of like the quiet hero, and there's somewhat of a, and I say somewhat, and we may get into this later, but somewhat of a villain or like the protagonist of the movie. And then, you know, there's like a love interest, and then they have a fight, and then they make up, that kind of thing. And then it all culminates with like everybody's like, hey, we're cool, like we're all bros or whatever.
Yeah. Classic 80s movie.
Yeah, classic okay 80s. But no, like, so but to actually give like an actual synopsis of the movie. Mm-hmm. So the movie centers around Bill Allen's character, Crew Jones. He's a local kid. It's a small town. It could be like kind of like any town, USA. Mm-hmm. And he's 17 years old. He runs a paper route with two of his buddies, and another guy and a girl. And they do their paper route on bikes, obviously, but they do like tricks and stuff like that because they're all really good at BMX biking. And there is a, you know, corporate bad guy, a millionaire that comes up with this idea of, we're going to go to some town somewhere and we're going to build the most diabolical BMX track that's ever been built. And they call it Hell Track. And the reason why they pick that town that Crew is from with his friends is there's a rich guy, the guy Timmer that rides the old guy on the bike, uh-huh. and the part where he throws the newspaper and it hits us. He's like, this world would be a lot better off without kids. Yeah. Line. He's a real rich guy, so he's kind of like Duke, so Duke Bass, the bad guy. He's got the riders, mm-hmm. like he's got the talent. This other guy, he's got the money. He's the one that actually builds the Hell Track, and they're gonna put on this race in this small town. And you know, mm-hmm. There's a lot of parts of the movie that like showcase how good this Crew is, this hometown kid. You know, the story kind of builds upon with some different things, like, you know, the hiding and racing from the cop in the lumber yard, mm-hmm. When the cop chases them, the opening scene with the, you know, newspapers and stuff like that, like all these different things he does during, like, they're setting the stage for this local kid's really good at BMX riding, but that's all he is. He's just like a local nobody. And this like big race with literally the 20 best riders in the world, mm-hmm. is coming to his backyard. And so there's like a whole thing where the town kind of like rallies around them, and they're like, hey, you know, how would our like young kids feel if this, you know, race comes to their town and they don't even get to participate? So they're going to hold a qualifying race, and then, you know, he gets to race in that to qualify for Hell Track. And so it's just that, it's just it's all about like kind of the ups and downs. I don't want to, I mean, you know, spoiler rules shouldn't apply for a movie that came out in 1986, but we'll just say, you know, spoiler for people out there that might see this podcast and go pick this up on the cheap from Mill Creek, because what we'll talk about later, which is a movie that has not been available for streaming physical media, anything since the last VHS copies were sold back in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yep.
And me and you didn't even have a VHS copy of this shit. We probably taped it off of like HBO or something like that and watched it over and over again.
It was a movie that wasn't played a lot on TV or HBO. It wasn't like, oh, there's no physical copy of it, but you'll see it once a year, once every couple of years.
Yeah, it's not like that. It was like somehow we recorded a copy of it, something because you may know different than I, which would be almost impossible because you're 4 years younger than me. I am pretty sure with almost 100% certainty that I never saw this movie in the theaters when it came out.
Oh, no, I don't think we ever saw
this movie came out in 1986, which means I was 9 years old, so you would have been 5 at the oldest when this movie came out. And the thing that I remember more almost as vividly as the movie coming out was we used to go to this restaurant in our hometown called Bonanza, and they actually had like a poster of the movie in like, it was like, but this is the funny thing, because now as an adult, I'm like, why the hell did Bonanza have a poster of like a current movie? And it was because they had posters of movies that were coming out. Like they were almost, and so you had like Moon Patrol.
Yeah.
Like the Moon Patrol game on arcade, which I love playing, and that poster of Rad. And we liked riding bikes and stuff like that, but we weren't like BMX dudes or whatever. But it was just like that.
I probably saw it when I was like 6. The earliest I could have seen it based on movies and distribution of VHS would have been 7.
Yeah.
You know, because if it came out in 86, it probably would have been a year or two later when I would actually see
it.
Yeah.
So I know we had a copy of this movie from TV.
Yeah.
And the only reason why I say that is because there's no way that we could it's like Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Yeah.
The reason why we can like literally like quote almost every word, phrase of Ferris Bueller's Day Off is because that was a big thing back in the day. In our area, cable really became kind of a thing in like 84. And I want to say it was like 87, 88, maybe, that mom and dad got a cable box.
Yeah.
And in that era, like there wasn't as many channels as there are now. So like they had the movie channels.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of movies that we had because mom and dad would buy blank VHS tapes and we would tape these fucking movies off of HBO, Cinemax, Showtime, and stuff like that. Yeah. So that's why we had like Willow and Rad and like those movies. And we remember them so vividly because at the time you only had a handful of them and we watched them all the time over and over and over again.
Well, that kind of leads me into why, we can bleed that naturally into why we're so nostalgic of it. Because one of the things I always laugh at is I remember when Thrash, and spoiler alert, when we talk real quick at the end, came out on DVD like 10 years ago, probably.
Yep. MGM Classics DVD.
Yeah. It was that, I was like, this is an 80s movie classic. And I forgot, like, when I was hanging around with people who are closer to your age, it was actually before me and Dana started dating. It was one of her good friends, like how we kind of met. And we watched it and he was like, dude, your idea of like 80s movies, movie classics are so different. And it was like, yeah, I forget that, like, we obviously like, the Ghostbusters, we reference Ferris Bueller and stuff like that. But we like Rad and Thrashin' and like Gleaming the Cube and like stuff like that. Those were our constant rentals or watching them on TV if we could. We saw, Breakfast Club and stuff like that, but those weren't the movies. Those were movies I got actually into more later.
So I want you to hold that thought, because I'm not going to talk about it and spoil it, but that's going to come into the why is it important section later. So, but keep going. Sorry. Yeah. Breakfast Club.
Yeah. So
Fast Times at Ridgemont High, stuff like that. Like, yeah, we saw those, but
it's like 3 o'clock high.
But 3 o'clock high, yes, because there are certain movies that resonate with us for a reason.
Morgan coming home. I remember showing that to Dana, and she was just like, "It's fine," but she's like, "It's not that great." But those were like, for some reason,
but that movie is freaking awesome, though.
Yeah, we were like,
yes,
and we were like, not edgelord.
Like we were literally the flag bearers of Morgan Stewart's Coming Home. Like,
Another great one that's like on DVD. But and then there was another weird one. Oh, Space Camp. We talked about Space Camp.
Yeah, we talked about that a couple or some episodes back.
Like our 80s movies are kind of different than what the normal best 80s movies list would be.
I think maybe though that might come with exposure. So if you think about it, like we may have seen Rad and we probably saw something like Rad early on, like 86, 87, maybe 88 when it came out. But when did we see Breakfast Club? Did we see Breakfast Club like 5 years later, 6 years later? You know what I mean?
Pretty young. We saw Breakfast Club.
And the reason why I bring it up is because you talked about thrashing. So I remember a few years ago at work, because everybody knows me as kind of like the guy that has like a million movies.
I don't know why they would know.
And he asked me if I had the movie Thrashing, and I was like, "Oh my god, are you fucking kidding me? I'm gonna bring it back." So I brought in Thrashing
with his
and
skateboard.
What's that?
It's a Teen Thanos with his angsty skateboard.
Right? Yeah. So I brought in Thrashing and we watched it, and he like loved it and everything and stuff like that. And I was like, "Dude, I was like, do you remember Rad?" And he's like, "No." And I was like, "You never saw Rad?" And I'm like, "No." So I have a acquired copy of a DVD that's not a legit copy
of Rad.
I almost before this
bought one.
What's that?
I almost broke down and bought one. Not too
I bought one off of eBay and didn't know it was like, at the time I bought it, I didn't know I was buying like basically a VHS rip onto a DVD. Yeah. So, shame on me. But I brought it in and I played it, and he was like, "Dude, this movie's garbage." And I'm like, "What the fuck?" And so the reason I bring that up about like when you watch certain movies versus others is that there is that whole like, there is a nostalgia element that's tied to it. So if you watched Thrashing when you were like 13 years old and now you're 30 something and you're watching it, of course that you're going to remember the good parts. You're going to forgive the cheesy parts of it and stuff like that. But if you've never seen, Rad, and you go back and watch it, you're like what the fuck? Like, especially the prom scene with the whole like "send me in it" and they're like dancing on the bikes and stuff. Like, that's cringy even for like the hardcore stuff.
We'll get into that
Rad player.
Real quick. I'll come back to that. But I think the thing is that like the reason why like the Hughes movies are like classic 80s movies is those hold up over time.
Yeah.
Like you
can put yourself in those positions.
But I think
like the Breakfast Club, like almost everybody can identify with at least one of those characters. Mm-hmm. Ferris Bueller, everybody can identify with like the playing hooky one day at school,
But I think that with these ones, you have to have an appreciation to kind of you have to go back to them with an open mind. You have to sit there and say, it's like watching, like when we watched, White Christmas, because our friends recommended it. It's a great Christmas movie. Like you have to go into it. This is a sing along movie from the 50s. It's going to be different. Like stuff like this, you have to go into it. Like it's going to be a cheese factor to it. And you have to like cheesy movies, like Space Camp. There's a lot of nostalgia to that movie. Flight of the Navigator, there's a lot of nostalgia to that movie that kind of covers up the rough edges of it not being John Hughes or an Ivan Reitman movie. Real quick, the song that Ray was referencing is by a band called Real Life and Send Me an Angel. And that was another thing that was so hard about not having any version of this movie existing to watch, is because that song you guarantee you've heard on some 80s channel, Sirius satellite, whatever streaming. If there's an 80s mix, at some point, Real Life, Send Me an Angel is going to pop up. And I believe it's also in another 80s movie. I might be wrong on that.
I don't know.
I know there was a few.
I just know that I know that one.
80s
for
movies
sure.
Recycled a lot of like the same songs. Covered the background, covered the synopsis, got into a little bit of our, nostalgia for it. I think a lot of it was, you look at our age when we watched it and what we wanted to do. We were, dirty BMX skateboard riding kids. Of course, we were going to gravitate towards those movies. And you're
inching so much closer to what I want to talk about.
I'll get to it. We'll get to it just one second. Real quick, you said something about Crew, to jump back into how Crew is for people watching or whatever. A great example of Crew's character is Spider-Man in the Amazing Spider-Man, the second reboot after Tobey Maguire. It's the first one of those movies where Peter Parker is like quietly, as you're watching the movies, like he's the coolest one. You know what I mean? He skateboards, but he's like the loner. That's kind of Crew, where he's not really a nerd. You know what I mean? He's like the cool guy that you want to be,
but he doesn't know it.
But he doesn't know it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's not cool in this group because he's a high school student. He's not cool in this like professional BMX. So it reminded me a lot of Peter Parker's character, where you're kind of watching him and you're like, yeah, he's not a nerd anymore. He's like freaking, he learns how to be Spider-Man through skateboarding. Like, it's fucking awesome, you know? Yeah. And that's kind of how Crew Jones is. He's not a ducky for like the 80s, you know, thing.
Yeah.
He's pretty sweet, but he's not like that type of character. But what am I itching? Do we want to jump into what you're
No, I want, well, are we talking about like why it means something to us, or like why it's important?
Yeah, why it's important, because I got a few things.
So I got two parts. So I'm gonna save what I mentioned for the second part. But for the main reason why it's important, this movie is important, is because this is, as a physical media collector and as somebody that likes to have access one way or another to the things that I like, for whatever reason, this movie just like stuck with us like all throughout the years. And the reason why is because it is, without even knowing it, it's like, okay, so if you know the movie, you know how much reference in pulp culture this is. Like Tosh.0 has made several nods to this movie.
Bill Allen,
the freaking Lonely Island. The Lonely Island freaking movie Hot Rod with Andy Samberg has like a million references to this movie. And down to the fact that they literally like copy the sister, like the little sister of Crew's shirt in part of the movie. Yeah. So
I knew that there was a lot of similarities in Hot Rod to Rad Race. I didn't realize they copied the shirt, but also I sent you probably this time when this comes out last year, maybe off by a few months. In the Goldbergs,
he was wearing a freaking Rad Racing shirt.
Yeah, and I took a photo of it and sent it to you because it's like this is that it's almost like a secret handshake where like people who know. You see that red shirt with red on it. When you see certain things, certain influences, you know what they're kind of going for.
So you got to remember, like, we come from a time, like I was just alluding to a little bit ago, where it's like, we had just gotten cable probably within the last couple of years. We didn't live in an internet age. Even with cable, you didn't live in an age where everything that you could possibly like or everything that could be on TV was on TV, like at a moment's notice. And this particular movie we watched over and over and over and over again as kids. So it just happened to be one of the ones that was in that, echelon of movies. There could be other movies that were way more important, could have been obviously better, that back in that time frame, maybe we only saw it once or twice. It's just, you have to remember that back then we lived in an era where you were truly you only knew about what you were subjected to.
Yeah.
So if your friends weren't into it, if your inner circle wasn't into it, it's like Dungeons and Dragons. It's the reason why we happened to grow up and ended up playing Dungeons and Dragons, and then other friends that we have didn't. You had this movie that for one reason or another, I ended up watching a lot when I was a kid. And then as I got older, started collecting DVDs, started collecting physical media.
Kind of rebuy.
At some point in time, I was like, dude, I want to watch Rad.
Yeah.
Like maybe I heard one of the songs on the radio or whatever.
Life, man.
And I'm like, dude, I want to go watch Rad. And then I start looking it up and it's like,
this movie doesn't fucking exist.
It doesn't exist on DVD. Like they haven't made this movie.
Yeah.
And so there's like that aspect of it. That movie doesn't exist. It's like, oh, I could buy a VHS copy of it for $200 and I don't have a freaking VCR. So good luck with that.
Well, it's a reason why cult movies become cult films, is they're not perfect. They got a little bit of camp, but they hit you in the right spots of nostalgia. You probably watched them or you're just open to that stuff. And, you know, when you go back to rebuying your childhood and you realize you're just like, Willow's hard to find. You know, that was like a DVD that didn't get.
That was like a big deal when that came out. And you like sent me that. You're like, dude, you can go get this like right now for like $20. I was like,
I remember I walked into the store like a couple of years ago to buy Willow. I walked into the Best Buy, and it was like a younger dude. And I forget how I am perceived people. You know what I mean? It's like you're like, you don't feel like an old man, and then you're like, you walk in there looking for your old man movie. And he's like, man, Willow, oh yeah, I remember that. And I'm like, you do not know what the fuck I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But I was like, cool, gave him the benefit of the doubt. And then it was actually pushed into the 4K movies. And he's like, oh, and I could tell by the that he didn't know. But it was nice that he tried.
Willow?
Like, yeah, Warwick Davis, Val Kilmer. What do you dwell in darkness without me, and it went away. But there was like a small handful of movies like kind of on that list of like, I want to have this in some way. And it was like Thrash and Willow, Space Camp, and Rad was always on the top of that list until one of the Fat Boys died, and we realized that. You know,
Disorderlies was on that list.
That's a whole different episode because I want to do a hip hop comedy episode about the lost genre of hip hop comedies, and I think that's the first one. I think that's the very first one. Yeah, that movie. I digress, but do we want to talk any more about like the nostalgia a little bit?
Oh yeah, no, I think, and I said you're inching closer. So we were talking about like, you know, there's movies like Breakfast Club and, you know, Hiding Out and you know, Morgan Stewart's Coming Home and stuff like that, and why like certain movies resonated more than others and stuff like that. And I think the reason why movies like Rad, Gleaming the Cube, Thrash and those kind of things resonated with us is because we lived back in the day. If you think about it, like, what is it that you do nowadays as a fan of anything? Now that we live in an internet age, like you can go on YouTube and you can watch, like, oh, you're really into freaking, you know, Fortnite. You can go on YouTube and you can watch Fortnite videos. You're into this. So back when we were kids, like, we were BMX biking, we were skateboarding. So like when those movies came out, we latched on those instantly. It was like, oh my God, there's a movie about BMX biking. And we like literally like watched the movie. Or like Thrash came out, like we were skateboarding. It was like, oh my God, this movie Thrash is about skateboarding. Yeah. Like we didn't have that outlet then to, other than magazines, we didn't have that outlet to like go somewhere and like, oh, I'm going to watch YouTube videos of other people skateboarding and then learn some tips and tricks about skateboarding. Yeah. I'm not saying you're going to learn tips and tricks about anything, but it's just one of those things like you identify with that. I didn't identify in the very early ages of the Breakfast Club of a fucking jock or some stoner that's trying to get out of detention to get his weed. I wasn't a jock in the 80s and I didn't smoke weed. So even though there was parts of the Breakfast Club that I thought was funny and that I didn't relate to self-identify with that like I did with thrashing.
Yeah, I was way too young. I self-identified that. It was like watching Swingers when I was 15.
Like when he was like, what would, like if your dope was on fire, what would you do? And he's like, impossible. It's in Johnson's underpants. I didn't even know what the fuck that meant the first time I saw. I was like, what's dope? And who's Johnson? Because I didn't know his name was whatever Johnson in the movie.
Yeah, there's so
much. But flash forward to Morgan Stewart's Coming Home, I identified with that because we liked horror movies and stuff like that. He was a big fan of horror movies.
Yeah, and we wanted to be that kid that had Jason's mask and Freddy's glove on.
Yes.
Yeah. Like Morgan Stewart's Coming Home is like the equivalent of a kid watching like a YouTube star and then trying to do that.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Where you see,
oh my God, that's such a perfect idea. Yes.
Oh, that's what I want to be. And that was like the same with these. And I always think too back to, you know, when you said that you like skateboarding when we live in Michigan, you know, or, you know, used to, not a big skater area. We used to get yelled at. People threw skateboard down the road and all of a sudden something like whizzes by you and you don't think about it. And you're like, oh, someone chucked something at me.
Yeah. Somebody threw something at me.
Yep. Yeah. Same thing when we can do a whole thing about running. Same way. BMX was a little bit different. Biking was different because you're away kind of from everybody. You can kind of
that, and plus everybody, whether you're BMXing or just riding, everybody had a fucking bike.
Yeah.
So,
but when something is actually made for you, when it's like a counterculture thing, when you're getting yelled at for skateboarding and the skateboarding movie comes out. And I always think back to Dungeons and Dragons, where it's like there was never any positive. Like nowadays it's like, so we talk about, there is no like nerd that plays D&D. People just play D&D. It's like playing any game. Nobody cares because there's positive reinforcement. There's Critical Role. There's, I will watch wrestlers play. There's other things in the world. It's like Dungeons and Dragons is like a big thing. You can be in the Critical Role side. You can be in your own friends. You don't even have to know what Critical Role is. You can still play D&D and still enjoy it.
Right.
We were so starved for like things representing like our weird hobbies that we loved the movie Mazes and Monsters, which is an anti Dungeons and Dragons movie.
Yes. That's so like, true. Oh my God. Yes.
When you think about like whatever weird thing you're into and you're like, man, there's not anything for me that's, I'm into
that movie was literally made to like scare people away from playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. It was like they
were like, look at this kid. If he plays Dungeons and Dragons, he's going to go crazy and kill people and then go in a psychiatric home.
We freaking love that movie because it was like, you're showing D&D in some form, not realizing the message was a bad message.
Right.
You know what I mean? But that's how it was. So it's like when you got these movies, like when this came out, it's, it's rough, whatever. But it was like, oh, it was ours. It was the dirty.
It was ours. Yes. It was ours.
It would be outside all day and then play Nintendo and Dungeons and Dragons when it was rainy or dark.
Yep.
So.
All right. So we're talking about Roblox or.
Yeah. Jump into why. I have a little bit. Mine is more of a philosophical why it was never produced in physical form, but you actually have something a little bit more.
So, and there could be crossover with a future episode that we might do on like things that need to have physical releases. But so this movie came out in 1986, and one of the things that's like hard to like kind of wrap your brain around is back in the 80s, these motion picture studios that were like, all right, fuck it. Home releases are going to be a thing. We have to figure out a way to try to make some amount of money like after the movie, like theatrical releases happen. So these motion picture studios back then, they would sign like anywhere between 15 and 30-year contracts on some of this shit. So if you think about something like Rad being like 1986, if somebody signed like a 30-year license on that movie, that means that whoever signed that contract.
Yeah. So
it may like I'm coming up with this. This is not who owned it, but say something like Vestron Video back in the day. If they bought that, that was great for the handful of years that they existed during VHS. But if they folded and went away after DVD came out, they own that shit. So unless somebody's coming to them, like knocking on the door, being like, hey, like we want the rights to Rad. It's not like the days we're used to where freaking Disney's out trying to get like freaking Star Wars and everything else. Like some of these places like that have the ability to put these movies out, like they may not have like the money to put together. So I feel like we're kind of like in this physical media golden age, or I don't even want to say golden age because the golden age represents like a boom. I feel like we're in this physical media, almost like Twilight of you have these boutique labels.
It's becoming
some of these movies are starting to come back out of their contracts that they may have signed a long time ago. And then you get the situations where we're in right now, where like Vinegar Syndrome acquired the rights to it, a very, very, very short time license for it, limited it to 1,000 copies and said, once 1,000 copies are sold, we're breaking the mold. No more pressings.
Yeah. And missed
and that literally happened at the very beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah.
It was April of 2020 when that happened, when we talked about this in previous episodes, where we were like kind of in like a bit of a depression where we weren't really paying attention to this kind of stuff. We were more focused on surviving, you know, how are we going to go out and get groceries, that kind of thing. And so I wasn't paying attention to the Twitter and stuff like that. And then I found out about it like 2 months after it came out, and the people I follow on YouTube started doing their videos of getting rad on 4K. And I was like, what?
4K?
Fucking rad came out on 4K. And then I go to buy it and it was like, oh shit, it's sold out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mentioned earlier where I was talking about Talia Shire, and I thought that like she was like, you know, the bottleneck in this whole thing. Yeah. And I don't think she was. So Talia Shire, it's kind of funny because she's like the mother in Rad, but she's almost like the mother figure of the movie itself, where she's not a producer, but she alone pretty much owns like a lot of the rights to the movie. Yeah. And so
she's the one that put a lot of it together when you start researching.
And so when this whole thing happened with Vinegar Syndrome, I was like, well, why is she being all like stingy with the fucking movie and not letting it just like go to a wide release? And then there was parts of me that thought, wait a minute, no, this is a company. We're talking about physical media. Physical media is on the decline. Mm-hmm. They don't know, like they know there's a bunch of rabid fanboys like us that will gobble us up, but not enough to make it go to like 10,000 releases or something like that. They don't want to be sitting on product. No. So that's why, and that's a whole nother idea for a future episode of like the whole idea of like FOMO and the fear of like when these limited editions come out, why we jump on them really quick. Like me with the whole 2 years ago with the Criterion edition of Godzilla. Yeah. Like when that came out, I jumped on that immediately. I spent that $100 and some because we know how quickly Godzilla shit comes into print, out of print, into print, out of print.
Yeah. Well, it's, to me, it's rough because we're in a rough time of like you said, we're in a renaissance of boutiques, but it's also hard because you have to follow them. You have to be, in the know. A lot of times you'll tell me when you find out. So if you're late, then I'm really late.
Right.
But it's hard because like I do this a lot with video games where it's like I want to support physical video games, but they're more expensive because of the fact that they don't want to send products. So it's a smaller boutique company doing it. They're putting up all the risk. So you're paying a little bit more. So I miss out on a lot of those, or I skip a lot of those opportunities where this had come out in a more of a mass market. And I don't know how many prints they're going to do, but it was more affordable. It was $25. You know what I mean? I got on it real quick. I didn't feel like, oh, this is going to like, oh, what am I, you know what I mean? And this was something that was like, I've been wanting this for years, I
think part of it's just Mill Creek being Mill Creek, and Mill Creek's got their pulse on, like their finger on the pulse of the community, and they know what people want. Yeah. So Mill Creek, they don't give a fuck. They'll print like 30,000 copies of this if they want to. Well, and I sent you that picture. I was like, it was in the wild at fucking Best Buy.
Yeah.
Like here we go. Like we go, like we're literally like 11 months removed from it coming out on Vinegar Syndrome, limited to 1,000 copies. And then not even a full year later, I'm walking around in a Best Buy and there's literally copies sitting on the shelf at Best Buy. And I'm like, dude, you can buy this at fucking Best Buy right now. We didn't even have to pre-order it at Amazon.
Well, I think this is like the biggest learning, if there's a learning, something to learn from this is that like, you just have to not be it's not being a dick, being vocal. Cause I think people think like, oh, we gotta be vocal. So you gotta be an asshole. No, it's like what you said, it's having creators paying, homage to this, having people talk about it, being positive, not being, toxic when it comes to supporting stuff like this. And I think that's where, because a lot of creators don't live in the world that we all live in, and not that they're like beyond us, but they have other things going on. They got projects, they might be retired, living their life, and then maybe a grandchild's like, you know, that people want this movie that you may have been involved in, or who even knows, you know what I mean? Like
right.
The whole situation with the Detroit band called Death, you know what I mean? Where they're
oh my God, Death dude's awesome.
Where they're, yeah, I know, I thought they were a brand new band. I was like, these guys are fucking awesome. And you realize they're older dudes in this whole documentary, you know?
Yeah.
And because I found them through Uncle Acid, this like kind of psychedelic rock, and I found those guys. I was like, these guys fucking rip, dude. And then you discover like their grandkids are like, you know, you were in a band, you know, so there's all this stuff.
Right.
So when you have that, like, you know, positive message and you're doing things in a way to like get people involved. Sorry, I derailed.
We're getting
anything else we want to hit them on Rad real quick?
No, man, it's just been a long time coming. It's been something that
watch. I'll message you when we watch.
It's been something that like we talked about, like we've already talked about the reasons and stuff like that, but it's just been one of those things that like every couple of years I've been like, why the fuck like would they not put Rad on? Because it's one of those things like it is a tight niche community when it comes to that. And so I see it on things like Tosh.0, like we talked about. Like I see it on Tosh, or I see like literally like feature length movies, or like you talked about with the Goldbergs. I'm like, there is mainstream media that's making reference to this movie, but that still doesn't mean that it's like that big of a movie that it's gonna. But I just kept like thinking like, what in the hell is because it's not the music. I'm sorry, the music is great in the movie, but it's not like
it doesn't have
one of the movies that I'm going to talk about in a future episode that we're doing. Of one of the reasons why it's not out is because of like the soundtrack. Like sometimes, like back in the early days, it seems like a really good idea to have all those different bands on the soundtrack of a movie, and then you get like 20, 30 years into the future, and a lot of them are a lot bigger than they are. And it's like, yeah, in order to put this movie out, we have to resecure the rights for like 15, 20 different like big name bands now
or
that weren't big name bands back in like 1982.
Or your whole soundtrack is a Prince album.
Yeah, like it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But no, man, I'm fucking excited. There's a handful of special features that are on the Mill Creek release, or that are on the Vinegar Syndrome release that aren't on the Mill Creek release. Mainly like the release from Vinegar Syndrome, the one that's limited to 1,000 copies, has a couple of commentaries, which I'm like really bummed about that there's not commentaries on the Mill Creek release. Mm-hmm. But that being said, at the end of the day, like beggars can't be choosers, and I'm just absolutely thrilled that one way or another this is on a legit physical media release that I can play. Because like I said, I have a DVD of it. It's not a DVD, it's a bootleg rip of the VHS. I watched this last night at work on a shitty TV, and I'm like, holy fuck, does this look so much better than the bootleg version I have. So but I'm excited about it. There's a 40-minute Q&A, which you learn a lot of things that you've already talked about. Like I had no idea that fucking Bart Connor
was a gymnast, was
like a 84 Olympic medalist, gold medalist in gymnastics. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And the fact that he was typecast, he was cast in that character because he looked very similar to
Zach,
Johnny from
Johnny's.
What's that?
Zapka, Bill, whatever.
No, he says like full out, like in an interview, he was like, I was literally typecast because I looked like Johnny from freaking
from
Karate Kid. Kid. Yep.
Dude, hey, they need to look at Netflix and say, Rad. Nowadays, I'm sure Lori Laughlin's going to need some money for some legal.
So when you watch this movie, like that's actually kind of funny you say that. When you watch this movie and then watch the special features, just watch the 40-minute Q&A it's got it's the Q&A is like the producer, Talia Shire, crew, so Bill Allen, and then Bart Connor.
Yeah.
Tell me Bart Connor was fucking like born in like 1958. Like it fucking blows my mind. I'm like, whatever freaking like
Captain America's super
ageless juice you're drinking, I want to fucking drink of it because it blew my mind that he was born in like 1958.
So yeah, I'll have to check that out. I'll message you and let you know what Dana. If I watch this before this gets edited, we'll throw a little maybe some text messages in here. Real quick, I want to break down a list of in the 80s, the trifecta, the holy triumvirate of extreme sports movies were Rad.
I'm gonna let you take this way because we probably had the same exact movies on this list.
Rad, Thrashing, and Gleaming the Cube.
Yep.
I would also put a bonus one because I didn't know about this one until later, but BMX Bandits is like maybe a fourth entry.
Yes, and I actually have a copy of that. I have a copy of BMX Bandits.
It's with what's her name as a kid?
It's got I know who you're talking about.
Australian actress, used to be married to Tom Cruise.
Shit.
She's married to
Nicole Kidman?
Yeah, Nicole Kidman. Yeah, Nicole Kidman's in it. It's actually it's really good.
Yeah.
Some 90s.
The funny thing is when people think like, hey, what's that BMX movie from like the 80s? Everybody says BMX Bandits. Nobody says fucking Rad.
Yeah, because I think because she came out.
There's actually like, have you ever seen the Angry Video Gamer? He does like AVG. Yeah, he does an episode on Rad, and that's what they do in the beginning. They're like, hey, I think you screwed up. I was asking for like the cool BMX movie back in the 80s, and you gave me this movie Rad. I was looking for BMX Bandits. Like, no, that's a cool movie.
So some 90s ones and maybe early 2000s that
Airborne,
yeah. Now that a very young Seth Green. I need to rewatch that. It's a rollerblading one. What do we got? Grind is another kind of, it's in the cheesy, it's 2000s era. Jackass, because skateboarding has had like, it was like 1970s. It's the new yo-yo. We're gonna have was it Tracy Peralta or what's his name? Yeah, but we're gonna have him because he rode with one of my other movies. He's like on an episode of Charlie's Angels, and then it sort of goes down, and then it comes back in the 80s around our time getting into it with Tony Hawk, Powell Peralta. What's his name? Whatever. Well, we'll put it in there. But he was in that, and then it goes away. It comes back in the 90s with Kids, which is less of a skateboarding movie. It's kind of skateboarding adjacent, skateboarding influence, definitely.
Yeah.
And then it comes back again in the 2000s with the Jackass era. So Grind is very Jackass adjacent. Bam's actually in it, but it's got Bucky Lasek plays himself. But the two kind of the best ones is the Dogtown and Z Boys, which the origins of a lot of skateboarding. And then,
which I have both. I have the legit Dogtown and Z Boys
Stacy Peralta
or Dogtown and Z Boys documentary, and then the Dogtown and Z Boys with Heath Ledger.
Yeah, Heath Ledger, the movie.
That was based on the documentary.
That's also very Jackass adjacent too, because Johnny Knoxville's in that.
Yeah,
I would recommend the documentary over the movie, but the movie's solid. And if you watch the documentary first, the movie's going to be like rewatching it a little bit, so maybe spread them out. And then a couple newer ones doing this. Stoked is a really good one too. It's a documentary. It's not a happy documentary, but the rise and fall of Gator.
Yep.
That's a really good kind of skate.
What was the one that what's his name? He does like the mid-90s.
Yeah, mid-90s is on my list. Yeah, mid-90s. Yep. I don't know how much skating is that's on my list. We bought that not too long ago.
There's a lot of skating in it.
Yeah, I know because Nine Club did a thing about it. Because they have the courthouse where it was Denali Manual.
Oh yeah.
What's his name does. But yeah, mid '90s. It's what's his name?
From Super bad.
Jonah Hill.
Jonah Hill. Yeah.
But then doing this list, I saw one called Hard Flip that looked interesting. It kind of is the very same, like I would be a skater, and the parents are like, no, you fuck off, you know what I mean? And
right.
Yeah. But that looked kind of interesting, so I was like, ooh, because it's weird that they're still because like no one has kind of broken the formula in a lot of these. Because I always say that the Trinity, the three, and even BMX Bandits is because isn't it like a caper movie? Like they're kind of they get mixed up and they're like kind of solved, so it's different. Gleaming the Cube, he's trying to solve his brother's murder. Thrashing, he's I don't think he's really trying to be a pro skater. He just wants to go to California and gets mixed up with the daggers, like this gang.
Right.
Rad, he wants to be a BMXer. So, but a lot of the newer ones always follow the formula of like, I want to do this, as my parents don't. Fuck you, mom.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it'd be cool that if this genre could come back a little bit differently, especially this day and age with how big skateboarding is becoming again with Instagram, YouTube, having maybe a different type of take on wanting to be a BMX or pro skater. Not just have it be, mom and dad being the wet blanket, shitting on your dreams.
Right.
All right. Anything else? We good?
I got nothing else to add.
All right.
Go buy this shit. Let the world know that we want this.
Buy it. Support cool things. Let us know if there's a movie that's not out on a physical platform and you want us to know about or talk about. Let us know in the comments.
Oh, yeah. We'll champion that to death.
Yep. All right, everybody.
Out.
Peace.
His name was Jose Inez.
Okay.
At the time of that movie, was the only BMXer in the entire world that could do a backflip on a BMX bike, and that's why they put that in the movie where he like learns how to do it, and then during like part like at the very end, there's a part on Hell Track where like he takes a shortcut and does a backflip. Yeah.
What was his name?
Jose Inez.
Nice.
He was the only person he was the only BMXer in the world at that time that could do a backflip.
All right.
And so the only reason why I mention that is because if you flash forward even into the 90s, like how many people were doing backflips on BMX bikes
and backflip tail whips and shit.
Yeah.